Hello, and welcome to this presentation about cultural humility in practice for interpreters and translators, brought to you by the National Association of Educational Translators and Interpreters of Spoken Languages, or NAETISL. Our goal is to leave you with tools and knowledge to recognize when cultural competency is not enough, and when the practice of cultural humility can further support cross-cultural communication and your work as an interpreter or translator. As you know, culture and language are intertwined, and as interpreters and translators, we find both fascinating. Our curiosity about language variations, idiomatic expressions, cultural connotations, and the impact of words on emotions have made us lifelong learners. We hope this information contributes to your curiosity as a linguist and expands the ways in which your culture and use of language promote connections and communication with colleagues and clients. Let's start by understanding cultural competency and what it does for our practice as interpreters and translators. Cultural competency is understanding the set of values, behaviors, attitudes, and policies that enable a system, organization, or people to work effectively in a certain cross-cultural situation. This involves understanding and respecting a culture and also having knowledge of what to say, to whom, where, and when, from a social and pragmatic perspective. This may involve memorizing a set of traits connected to a certain group, or a set of questions that you need to ask a specific group of people, whether they are interpreter and translator colleagues or other clients. The problem with cultural competency is that it assumes one can be competent in a culture other than their own. It is very true that a complete understanding of cultural nuances allows translators and interpreters to effectively and appropriately deliver intended messages. But can we possibly understand all cultural nuances and always be confident that our words will not create cultural misunderstandings or break the cultural bridges that our clients are attempting to create or strengthen? Does our knowledge about one community make us experts on all communities? After all, communities change all the time. So, how do we keep up? How do we communicate those changes? Now, let's talk about cultural humility and get to know the women who established this evidence-based framework. Dr. Melanie Tervalon and Dr. Jan Murray Garcia published Cultural Humility versus Cultural Competence, a critical distinction in defining physician training outcomes, multicultural education. In 1998, while working at Children's Hospital Oakland and engaging in ongoing dialogues and processes to address inequities in patient care received by ethnically diverse populations. As a result of those efforts, the Cultural Humility Framework was formed, and it has expanded to fields other than healthcare, including education, public health, and social work, because, well, inequities are not isolated to a specific group and don't discriminate. Here's a great definition of cultural humility by Catherine Yeager and Susan Barr Wu. Cultural humility involves an ongoing process of self-exploration and self-critique, combined with a willingness to learn from others. It means entering a relationship with another person with the intention of honoring their beliefs, customs, and values. It means acknowledging differences and accepting that person for who they are. Cultural humility challenges us, as interpreters or translators, to go beyond the concept of cultural competency to include a personal lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique, recognition of power dynamics and imbalances, a desire to fix those power imbalances and to develop partnerships with people and groups who advocate for others, and institutional accountability. Some of the key attributes of cultural humility include openness. This means having an open mind and being open to an interaction with a culturally diverse individual in terms of ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, social status, interprofessional roles, disability, age, and so much more. As interpreters and translators, it means being mindful that we will work with clients, patients, or families whose perspectives may differ from our own, that we must be intentional about our use of inclusive and formal language to demonstrate respect and equity, and that we must control our own assumptions and biases about our colleagues and clients based on their appearance, vocabulary, register levels, or other identities that they choose to reveal to us. Self-reflection and awareness. This attribute reflects our ability to be aware of your strengths, limitations, values, beliefs, behavior, and appearance to others. Most importantly, it is understanding our limitations, accepting that we do not know, and reflecting on our thoughts, feelings, and actions toward people who share our culture and those who do not. As interpreters and translators, this self-awareness helps us avoid communicating that we are sources of all things cultural or even experts in our own cultures. The implication of gaining mastery about one cultural group, including our own, is that people assume they know all there is to know about a group, and they stop noticing distinctions. In essence, they stop learning. This disposition can lead them to approach interactions with cultural arrogance and separatism, thereby invoking a position of privilege. As interpreters and translators, stopping at this point in our learning will lead us to apply our perceived knowledge about a cultural group to all members who belong to that group. In this way, that knowledge becomes the status quo, and there is no recognition of the impact of our own biases, values, power, and privilege. Lifelong learning. Cultural humility is not a workshop or a professional development checkbox you complete as part of your job. Cultural humility is not a concept, but a practice, a verb, an action. It is an ongoing process that changes your response to new situations, experiences, and relationships. We become aware that each community, each patient, each parent, each client we see is distinct with specific needs and characteristics. We realize that there are communities within communities, all of which deserve recognition and special attention. We emphasize to our clients and colleagues that knowing about one community does not make us culturally competent about all communities, since communities are dynamic and change over time. More importantly, for our work as interpreters and translators, we make a conscious effort to avoid expanding stereotypes about our own communities. We stop and don't initiate or encourage conversations that start with all people in this culture or everyone who speaks this language does this, because we understand that every person is a different world. Practicing cultural humility requires continuous and intentional work. Are we aware of our own efforts to expand stereotypes about others or about our own cultures? Think about whether or not you have thought or said these things and reflect on it. Institutional accountability. We recognize that individual work toward cultural humility is important and is even more impactful when institutions engage in the same work of critical self-reflection and self-critique, mitigating power imbalances, and developing mutually beneficial partnerships to transform inequity, discrimination, and biased organizational policies and cultures. Organizations are encouraged to respond with practical steps to develop fair, accessible, respectful, inclusive policies and workplace environments. Empathy and compassion. How are we demonstrating empathy and compassion to those around us, whether they are interpreters and translators or our clients? How are we demonstrating compassion for ourselves when our work as interpreters and translators becomes stressful and emotionally difficult? We all have multiple identities that include our gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, religious or spiritual affiliation, education level, disability, and so much more. Our identities are always evolving, and they shape how we view and interpret the world around us. They inform how we show up and interact in spaces and with people because of our associated values and beliefs. Many of us are not aware of these values and beliefs and how they influence our perceptions, our judgments, and interactions. How are you using your identities to show empathy and compassion for your colleagues or clients? Empathy is a pathway to cultural humility because it encourages us to see and feel from another's perspective, can help to broaden our perspectives and gain insight necessary for mitigating power imbalances, working in partnership with others, and holding institutions accountable to the work of cultural humility. Acknowledging power imbalances and balancing power imbalances. This attribute recognizes that people are experts of their own lives. Our clients, whether they are patients, parents, families, or colleagues, have their own priorities, and we do too. The voices of our clients are just as important as our own, and we must be intentional as we listen and learn. How are we balancing power imbalances between linguistically diverse and monolingual clients? Do you summarize long-winded answers that a client shares when responding to a simple question because you decided that some information is not pertinent to the situation? Whether you are working as a remote, over the phone, or in-person interpreter, or if your work focuses on translation, there are simple ways to put cultural humility into practice. These are just some suggestions, and we invite you to reflect what you can do today in your setting and in your context to make one change that reflects an attribute of cultural humility. Learn to pronounce your clients' names properly. A name is a cultural identity. When someone, consciously or not, mispronounces, disregards, or changes a client's name, they are in a sense disregarding the family and culture of the client as well. Ask, practice, and be open to an opportunity to learn. Be aware of body language and nonverbal communication. Body language can speak louder than words, as it can give us an idea of a client's attitude towards authority figures, personal space, or their understanding of information that we relay. Over-the-phone interpreters must compensate for the lack of nonverbal cues from their clients with exceptional listening skills as they support communication. Be aware of making assumptions, but also observe and intervene if communication is affected. Should you debrief with your monolingual client after the meeting? Will the information you share help with a future meeting without expanding stereotypes about a cultural group? Adjust. As interpreters and translators, are you being intentional in your use of inclusive language? Are you respecting people's pronouns? Are you considering variations within your own language? Are you adjusting your register level without compromising accuracy? Reflect. What are you doing as an individual to co-build and co-sustain meaningful relationships with people from different cultural backgrounds, be that in terms of race, ethnicity, gender expression, sexual orientation, religion, mental health or disability status, political views, and more? What's missing and what is going well? In what ways are you bringing your identity, power, and privilege to your work as an interpreter or translator? We hope that this information and questions help you reflect on your journey of cultural humility and determine your next steps in this lifelong process. As we come to the conclusion of this presentation, we want to share how NAETISL practices cultural humility at the institutional level. Our nonprofit organization was born because we believe in institutional accountability and we acknowledge power imbalances in the area of language access and communication equity in early childhood and K-12 settings. Our organization reflects the community that we serve because none of us are experts as individuals, and we believe that language justice in education can only be accomplished through collaboration of key players. We are interpreters, translators, bilingual and multilingual families, teachers, administrators, language access and language justice advocates working together to balance the imbalance of information that linguistically diverse families receive due to the lack of interpreters and translators, or due to the lack of qualified and trained interpreters and translators available to relay important information about student discipline, academic progress, special education, gifted education opportunities, family engagement events, and more. Our organization is actively working to create the standards for interpreters and translators in early childhood and K-12 settings, as well as establishing a national certification process for interpreters and translators in education, following the lead of our medical, legal, and sign language interpreter colleagues. 2 years ago, we published a National Code of Ethics for Interpreters and Translators in Education, following the work started by the University of Minnesota program on translation and interpreting and the Minnesota Department of Education over the span of 5 years, and based on the framework provided by the National Code of Ethics for Interpreters in Healthcare. Focus groups and surveys involving stakeholders help to ensure that our code is reflective of the work that school-based and freelance interpreters and translators in education do each day. I invite you to visit our website, which offers free resources for interpreters and translators interested in expanding their knowledge of educational terminology and protocols. We have an extensive clearinghouse of resources, which includes glossaries in various language, video clips to practice interpretation, and more. Our organization is invested in the professional development of interpreters and translators in education and provides learning through opportunities including our online course for interpreters in education, monthly webinars, our annual conference, and mentorship opportunities. Members of our organization receive discounts on all professional development opportunities. We look forward to continuing to support your lifelong learning as we work in collaboration to transform inequity and provide fair and inclusive policies that support language access and language justice. Thank you for strengthening cultural and linguistic bridges through your work as interpreters and translators.